Make sure to check out my Kofi account, link down in the description. And check out my other series, Modern Classics and TV Treasures. Should I do Snow White and the Three Stooges or 1916 Snow White? I'm having a hard time deciding. With the new Snow White remake coming out with CGI dwarves, which I'm pretty sure are going to haunt many people's nightmares, and another Snow White coming out this year, which is basically a big middle finger to Disney. You know what? Screw it! I'll do them both! This review, I'll do Snow White 1916, and next review, I'll do Snow White and the Three Stooges. So, let's dive into this double feature of Snow White adaptations, shall we?
His name is Henry. He's all about those classics. Dust off the old ones. And
Can't be done, I tell you. Can't be done.
He finds some goodies. And finds you some baddies. And reviews ones. Folks from forgot. His name is Henry. He's old with the mustache. 1 year century reviews are here. His name is Henry. He's old with the mustache. 20th century reviews are here. 20th century reviews are here.
Hello, I'm Henry R. Mockingbird, your host with the mustache.
Hi, I'm Gary.
Oh, Gary, I didn't know you were here. Alright, you could join this review. There was a beautiful princess named Snow White, who the wicked queen despised. So she tries to get Snow White destroyed, only to escape in the woods and come across the Seven Dwarfs' cottage, who aid Snow White. So, what do I think of this version of Snow White? Well, I like it. I like how this version is faithful in some parts, but not faithful in others. Thing that present day book fans would probably jump down your throat for. But back in 1916, you obviously didn't have the internet to tell you when to be faithful and when not to be. The film was based on a book by the same name by the same brothers who scarred your childhood even more than Hans Christian Andersen did, the Grimm's brothers. And this little film itself was directed by J. Searle Darley, who also had a huge filmography dating back to 1907, and also directed several films with this movie's main star, Margaret Clark, with films like Poor Man, and The Violet Girl. He also directed some of the earliest film adaptations, including Treasure Island, and directed the very first adaptation of Frankenstein, where Frankenstein looked more like a Batman villain. And he also directed the very first film adaptation of A Christmas Carol. And this film itself was the very first feature-length film that Walt Disney ever saw. Instead of me telling you, I'll let him tell you.
It's the thing I remembered as a kid. I saw Marguerite Clark in it in Kansas City one time when I was a newsboy. They had a big showing for all the newsboys, and I went and saw Snow White. It's probably one of my first big feature pictures I'd ever seen.
And this version of Snow White would later go on to inspire his own version of Snow White. And there are definitely moments where you can see where the inspiration came from. The longest time, this film was considered lost in a vault fire. But a print was discovered in Amsterdam and was restored in George Eastman's house and was included on the 2000 DVD of Treasures from the American Film Archives. We open with the last thing you would expect from a Snow White adaptation: Santa Claus, of course. He puts dolls of the characters onto the table, and they come to life. We cut to the actual story where we see the Queen meeting up with Witch Hex, where Witch Hex rejuvenates her beauty. And this idea of the Wicked Queen having to rejuvenate her beauty would later be used in Snow White and the Huntsman. Anyways, going back to the film, Witch Hex gives the Queen a magic mirror, which is basically a hand mirror, which was in the book, but would later be ditched to a mirror on the wall. As far as my knowledge goes, I'm guessing this is the only adaptation where the magic mirror is a hand mirror. As for the Witch Hex character, I have mixed feelings on her, but I'll get to that later. We go to the castle and we see this guy who I'm just going to call the Chamberlain produces the other handmaidens to a new handmaiden, and the Chamberlain is on his way, while he gives a hilarious bowing down. The handmaiden proceeds to tell the new girl about Snow White, and I should probably talk about what happens earlier in the movie and how Snow White got her name. We see on a snow day that the Queen, Snow White's old mother, pricked her finger and let some of the blood onto the snow. The Queen wants her daughter to have lips as red as blood. To be fair, that was the way Snow White's lips were described in the book originally. Later versions would describe Snow White's lips as being red as the rose. Maybe it's just me, but I prefer lips as red as the rose rather than lips as red as blood. Whenever I hear lips as red as blood, it just sounds creepy. Then cut to the kitchen where we see Snow White cleaning up a stew pot. It is played by Marguerite Clark, who, believe me when I say, she was hot stuff. She was only second to Mary Pickford back in the silent era. I also like how the staff of the castle treat her like a princess and not just a maid, referring to her as Your Highness. Anyways, she goes to the huntsman, who goes out to get some ducks. We also get to see the prince, and this is one thing I think this version does better than the Disney version: the romance between the prince and Snow White. They meet at the beginning and they get to know each other, and the romance is really cute and sweet. Though they're only a couple in the opening, it feels really believable. It's not like the Disney version where the prince pretty much sings a song to Snow White and they're automatically in love, which feels outdated even for 1937. Here, they get to know each other, they talk to each other, and they take a walk in the woods with each other. Back at the castle, the prince is coming, and Snow White and the handmaidens, who pretty much become her friend groupies, girls being girls, fashion and all, they decide to give her a makeover, make her look more presentable, and they go out to meet the prince. The prince dances with Snow White, thinking she's a handmaiden.
What is this? Bridgerton?
You're right, Gary. I mean, hot damn. I have expect to hear Mozart during this scene. And the prince gives the queen the letter, and for a moment it turns into a cartoony letter, and then back again. The prince discovers Snow White's identity, and the wicked queen tells the prince to beat it, and she's visited by Witch Hex, dressing up in a Halloween witch costume, it looks like. Previously, I mixed on the character Witch Hex. You see, the queen works for her and owes her a human heart. Witch Hex is basically the source of all the Wicked Queen's power in this version. The Wicked Queen doesn't know any witchcraft in this version. Now, this change I'm a bit half and half on. On the one hand, the queen at least has more of a reason to want Snow White's heart other than she's jealous of her beauty. But on the other hand, in both the book and the Disney version and in other adaptations, the Wicked Queen is basically wicked. She knows witchcraft, and I would argue that the Wicked Queen's knowledge of witchcraft is what made her terrifying to begin with. So having a witch in the story know all the witchcraft and the Wicked Queen knows none kind of demotes her to being a flunky. While there are definitely cons to Witch Hex, there are also some pros, like how Witch Hex is played by May Robinson, who also played another queen, the Queen of Hearts, in Alice in Wonderland 33. And she even transforms into the opening of The Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. And her witch lair is really cool with giant mushrooms, which I'm pretty sure the makers of Bulgarian Treasure Planet were on. And she even has a cat assistant who's also her pet. And a part of me thinks that this was the inspiration for the Wicked Witch of the West having a pet flying monkey. Anyways, the Wicked Queen demands the huntsman to kill Snow White. He doesn't want to. I don't know why. He's played by Lionel White, who would later go on to play the ghost of Christmas Present in Christmas Carol 1938. He commands him to do it. So Snow White says goodbye to her groupies, and she's on her way with the huntsman. What the huntsman is about to do really hurts him, and he doesn't want to do it. So he pretty much tells Snow White what the queen is doing. She doesn't believe it, but then she's forced to believe it. So the huntsman tells her to run off, and he's going to get the heart of a pig. So she's all alone, and a lion is looking after her. No, seriously, it's an actual...
If he were king of the forest.
Gary, can you not interrupt my review, please? Anyways, let's go back to the review. Lion. Unlike later versions like the one I'm doing next, Snow White and the Three Stooges, where they have a mountain lion, here it's an actual lion. Real life, honest to goodness lion. Usually a film would have a guy in a costume dressed up as a lion, but nope, they have a real life lion. I find it very unintentionally hilarious how both her and the lion are not even in the same location. Look, they're two different pieces of footage. But thankfully, the brown bird, who she saved earlier, comes to her rescue and leads her to a cottage in the woods, which turns out to be the home of the 7 dwarves. She goes on in and thanks the bird, and she starts eating their food. Stranger danger, anyone? Well, we cut to the dwarves. It's funny that I use that song from Snow White because remember that washing scene from the Disney version where we got a bunch of washing gags? Well, it's done here, but it's done a lot less over the top. It's over the top in its own way. Down to eat, and they discover someone's been eating their food, and later discovers Snow White. They decide to let her stay and give her some stuff in return. One of the dwarves throws one of them into a barrel, and they all start pouring water all over him. And now this is where I know where Disney got the idea to have all the dwarves wash Grumpy all together. I really enjoyed it, and I could see why Walt Disney really liked it. So I highly recommend it. 5 gold stars. That's pretty much all I have to say about Snow White 1916. Well, until the next review, I'm Henry R. Mockingbird, your host with the mustache, and tune in for Snow White and the Three Stooges coming up next.